exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Yep, our herd seems mighty restless tonight. Seems to be all sorts of stomping coming from the pens.
I bet it's those damn Chupacabras again. All they want to do is suck blood day and night. Last week they got into the chicken coops and made a real bloody mess.
Well, I'd really hate to get the shotgun out. For the most part, they're pretty spineless creatures, aren't they? Any suggestions what we should do?
Well, I think we should ask one of our guests tonight, Scott Corrales. He's been chasing them for years.
Well, we better ask him soon. Here comes a couple of them chupas now. I'm out of here.
Oh, Jesus. Let's go back to the studio. Oh, my God. Looking at their... Tim, I won't let him get you. Well, they got you. Oh, I guess I'm here alone. Tim, are you alive?
Yeah, I'm okay.
You outraced the guy.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, got a little drool on me here, but I guess I'm okay.
What are you gonna do? I swear those Chupacabras are all over the place. Last I heard, they were in Argentina.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's just a couple of days ago. But we'll find out more about that. Why don't you tell us what we're going to be getting ourselves in for tonight?
Well, Tim, we've got a couple of really fantastic guests tonight, and we're going to be running the gamut here. We'll be talking about chupacabras, blood monsters, things like that, and then we're going to be also talking about.
Skinwalker Ranch.
The Skinwalker Ranch will be some of it, as well as just really the whole bizarre nature of the UFO phenomena. It's visitors from other planets, secret military black projects, extra-dimensional sentient energy entities. Your guess is as good as mine, and that's why we have this show, because we can bring in these great guests, and we may not be able to answer any questions, but we sure have a great time talking about it.
We got the best guests going. I mean, we just put our heart and soul into this program, and I know our audience is increasing, and we get a lot of emails. And please do send us your suggestions for guests and all too. We welcome hearing from you. Anyway, why don't you tell us who we're going to have on this evening, Tim?
Yeah. First of all, this evening, I'm really happy we've got Scott Corrales with us. Now, this is Scott's first time on our show, so we're going to have to treat him nicely. And so now Scott is.
Well, I tied the Chupacabras up, so we're safe there.
Oh well, I guess we better get through this then, because they'll chew through their chains pretty quickly. So now Scott's a prolific writer and investigator of UFO and paranormal events in the Hispanic communities worldwide. He's one of the most respected names in the global world of ufology, with contacts in South, Central America, Mexico, Spain, and the Caribbean. The Institute of Hispanic UFOlogy was established in October of 1998 with the appearance of the first issue of Scott, you're going to have to help me with this one. I always mess this one up. Inexplicata. Am I saying that right? He's got his microphone muted, so that or he's pulling his hair out, going, "How you mess that up, damn it!"
Not at all. Inexplicata.
Inexplicata. Thank you.
Yes, indeed.
All right. So now the organization currently has representatives and contributing editors in over a dozen Spanish-speaking countries. Now, Scott's research into sightings and hair-raising encounters with the chupacabra are the inspiration for the fascination with the lust for blood by the ultra-terrestrials. And he is also a contributor to the Dark Side of UFOlogy trilogy, which includes the books Alien Bloodlust, that's our most recent one. This has come out. UFO Hostilities, and of course, my favorite, Sexual Encounters with the ETs. Now, now later on in the program, we'll bring in Dr. Bruce Cornet. Now, Bruce has been on our show before, but we're always happy to have Dr. Cornet with him. Now, Bruce Cornet conducted extensive investigations concerning the Pine Bush, New York UFO sightings. During his investigations, Dr. Cornet had his own personal experiences in which he obtained video and audio recordings of UFOs. Dr. Cornet also initiated a research project to install passive detection and monitoring devices at UFO hotspots around the United States. And as Tim pointed out, there's some involvement with the Skinwalker Ranch and Dr. Cornet. And so we'll have to ask him about that when he joins us on Exploring the Bizarre. So, Tim, we're going to start with Scott first. So, Scott Corrales?
I think so.
That's so.
Right. Scott and I have known each other now for many years. Scott was a regular contributor to UFO Universe, as were you, Tim. And
those were the
we
days.
ran that. We ran that magazine into the ground. I mean, we ran that magazine for 11 years. Well, which actually is probably a historical amount of years. Most UFO magazines came and gone, except for maybe Fate magazine, which still may be around, pardon the expression, in a skeleton form. Although I haven't seen a printed issue in a while, but I know Phyllis is got one up her sleeve, and you never know when an issue might appear. But Scott, how did you get into this? I mean, you're the man behind the scenes as far as the Chupacabra goes, but you've got a wealth of information on all these close encounters and events that have taken place in the Caribbean and Mexico and Cuba and Puerto Rico. And what the heck is going on? What got you started?
Well, this is interesting. I always tell people I blame it on a little Spanish children's magazine called Strong that used to publish in the late 1960s. It had a little section that you would talk about the space program, the Apollo moon launches, and is
that like our weekly world news?
No. Imagine
I didn't mean Weekly World News. We had the Weekly Reader when we were a kid.
Closer.
Scholastic Books used to put it out.
Scholastic. Yeah. There you go. I remember. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
But imagine something more commercial, full of cartoons and things that kids might be interested in. And one of their sections could there possibly be life on other planets? And that got me hooked. And it coincided with the great Mexican UFO wave of the late 1960s.
What year would that have been?
This would have been 1970.
Oh, okay.
1970. And more or less, you started to see people, our teachers were so into, let's say, the space program, they took it to heart, and their line of dialogue to us is, you kids are going to be so lucky. We have seen men on the moon. You will see people from other worlds visiting us. So we were mentalized, and this was a great thing. And we had all our magazines. We had Duda, which was published by Editorial Posada. I mean, that was probably the main magazine at the time. It explored everything from UFOs to, Noah's Ark and, the Templars, all kinds of things. So it was a perfect environment in which to develop a healthy interest in these subjects. Plus, you had all the books by the European authors, like I'm trying Jacques Bergier, for example, were all being translated into Spanish, and we could read them for a moderate price. You're just a kid, you can buy a paperback, for 10 pesos, which was 80 cents at the time.
Oh,
And
yeah. Boy, I'll try it now.
yeah, not gonna happen. Not gonna happen. So I
Yeah.
sort of, throughout my time in Mexico, I was very interested. We moved to Puerto Rico, and I happened to arrive in Puerto Rico just as the 1975 wave was breaking out, and our predecessor to the Chupacabras, the Mocha vampire, that was going on at the time. So
I know you've written about that in the alien bloodlust book that
correct.
actually is just out probably a day or two ago. I don't even have my copy yet, and I don't think you do either. But we'll wing it, so to speak. Now, what was the first case that you actually investigated or wrote up?
It's interesting. You mean about Chupacabras?
Well, no, just in general, UFOs.
Oh,
first of all, what are UFOs called in the Hispanic world? They have a couple of different names, right?
True. They have
Yeah.
ovnis, which is literally
Yeah.
unidentified flying objects. Then the contactee movement came up with a very interesting acronym called VED, VED, which is Vehículos Extraterrestres Dirigidos, guided extraterrestrial vehicles, presupposing an alien origin to the phenomenon. But that's clearly something that when you see it written down, it's a contactee who's writing about it. And in fact, contacteeism is still hot and heavy in Latin America. It never really faded away. You still have contactees.
Six Paz.
Oh, Sixto Paz, that's right. Yeah, in Peru.
Yeah.
And you have also in Argentina and Mexico, you have renewed contacteeism. Venezuela also has their contactees. It never ever faded away, and you have to be careful many times because you find people still, will drag that into the mix, and you're not quite sure what they're doing. But
now, are the contactees, are they taken more seriously? Would you say in the Hispanic community?
Let's say that they're cherished. Because the message is, of course, the brothers of light. The same old. But also in Latin America, it doves in with Spiritism, which is still as big of a religion.
Kardec, yes.
Exactly.
Allan Kardec,
You'll go to every house will probably have its little Allan Kardec book next to the Bible, or something. They have Christian Spiritism that they've got going. So so that's seen with great favor.
I actually picked up two girls at a bar one night because I asked them where they were from, and they said I guess they had been born in Cuba or something. And I said, "Oh, Allan Kardec." They were so impressed that somebody living here in the United States would know who Allan Kardec was, but he was French, right?
Correct. His name was I guess Gaston Bivelle, I think. And he started at table tipping, I believe. That was his thing.
That's right.
And then he started writing these prayers and meditations.
Ouija board too. Ouija board, I think.
Pretty much something along those lines, and was huge at his time. And I guess at the very same time
still is, and I believe in Brazil and in Cuba.
Correct, especially in Brazil, where Spiritism sees aliens as the highest level of spiritual being contact. So
would they have Ashtar? Would they have Ashtar?
They have Ashtar. They have the I'm drawing a blank, but they have all these other names.
That's where they've all gone to then.
But pretty much, it's a good place to be.
I was going to say they like the weather. What the hell would you want to be around here for when you could be relaxing on the Bikini Beach in Rio de Janeiro?
In fact, the last time I saw Ashtar ever mentioned, I think, was in a Warren Smith book back in the 70s. He was never seen around here again.
Yeah, well, okay. So you went straight, so to speak. I mean, you weren't too much into the contactee movement.
Never ever.
Okay. So what was the first couple of cases that you remember that you were impressed by?
very impressed. I'll tell you what happened. I think I happened to be in Puerto Rico on vacation, picked up a copy of Jacques Vallée's Dimensions, and toward the end, he says, it's a shame that no one has ever translated Salvador Freixedo's Defendámonos de los Dioses, Beware of the Gods, into English. And I said, hello, that's something I'm going to do. And I set out to do it. And of course, the book, it's still out there, remains unpublished. But I started to write about the cases going on in Puerto Rico in the late 1980s, early 90s. Remember, the late 80s were the time when you had Laguna Cartagena, that body of water in the southwestern corner of Puerto Rico, that was supposed to be an alien base. People were seeing objects emerging, plunging into it. You had that entire southwestern corner of Puerto Rico was awash in UFO sightings, in sightings of grays, abductions, and a number of different researchers from around the world. Vallée himself went down. You had Japan's NHK network produced one of the best UFO documentaries out there, but it's available only in Japanese. And it was all about Puerto Rico at that time. And of course, I started just documenting that. Pretty soon, I started getting in touch with a group called Terra Incognita in Mexico. We began exchanging materials. I started rekindling contacts that I had in Mexico. With Spain, we started dealing with Manuel Carballel, who's one of the foremost writers. My God, he's completely moved out of UFO into mainstream. And certainly, the network grew through recommendations, through the rekindling of old friendships and acquaintances. And before you know it, we had a virtual institute, which became Inexplicata, the Institute of Hispanic UFOlogy.
Now, what was the okay? What reports did you consider like serious? What impressed you the most? I mean, was it stuff? Were there certain researchers that you looked to provide information that you thought was more valid than coming from other sources?
Well, going back to the classics, let's say I had a great friendship with people that like Berthold Swartz. I mean, we had always been exchanging correspondence. Max Edwards over in Canada, and they were also directing me to who was a trustworthy source. So in Mexico was always the works of Pedro Ferriz. In Puerto Rico, you had Orlando Rimax, who had the only radio show of his time. But then again, the problem with his show, he would give you the actual cases as they happened, but he was a contactee. He himself was a contactee, and his group, El Núcleo Alción, was also a contactee organization. So you had to sort of know how to filter things. But then again, you would eventually get to the nitty-gritty. I think the one thing at the time that was lacking was a major UFO magazine in Spanish. Spain had several and still does to this day. But Mexico had already gone through its phase. Puerto Rico had none. And I believe Argentina had 2 or 3 which have since disappeared. Argentina has always had a tremendous UFO community to the present day.
Well, Brazil has one. A.J. Girard has the magazine there, UFO Brazil.
Yes, that has been steady for the past 30 years, at least. I mean, I think it picked up from some of the older authors, like Dr. Olavo Fuentes, I believe his name was. He had been big in the 60s. He had something called, in Portuguese, O Livro Branco dos OVNIs, the White Book on UFOs. And I think that became the wellspring of a lot of other publications. There's also
we had correspondence with SBDV. Is that the right initials?
Yes, that's the organization.
Walter Bueller's
organization.
Group.
Correct. Yeah. Yes.
He put out an English edition of the newsletter. Now it was a little choppy. The English was not exactly all that great, but if you read it, I found that if you read material that's translated, you read it a paragraph at a time. You have to you can't read it word for word. You got to consume it a paragraph or 2 at a time, and then you can roll with it.
Well, we try to make it better. for
Yes.
Inexplicata. So it reads, so there's some kind of poetry to it.
Yeah.
But I understand.
Yes.
And it certainly happens
Yes.
now that we use machine translation so much for
Yes.
languages that we don't understand, like Chinese and Japanese.
Mhm.
And at least, but like you said, Dr. Bueller's organization certainly had a wide network, and it was he who was following up on the Villas-Boas case, whatever
That's
happened to
correct.
Villas-Boas
Yes.
after. Villas-Boas, after his, legendary encounter, went on to become a judge. He
Mhm.
became a judge in the court system, and he never again had any experiences and was reticent about talking about what happened back in the 50s.
Uh-huh. Well, now he passed away at a rather early age, correct?
I believe he did. I think he died maybe
Mhm.
not so young. I think his death was announced in the 90s, in the
Mhm.
early 90s. That's as far as I recall. And there were a few photographs of him circulating, and people had not seen him
Yes.
since that famous black and white photo that appeared in Flank Saucer
Uh-huh.
Review.
Well, I think we found a couple that I believe we used in the a book, pardon the expression, and the title "Screwed by the Alien."
Brilliant.
I will go to my grave with that. Maybe I'll have that engraved on my tombstone. Yes.
That and those sexy
Please,
saucer people.
very appropriate. Yes.
But no, Brazil
So-
has its own community, and Argentina, as I said, is prolific.
Mhm.
We're
And
getting
how have the reports changed over the years?
well. Remember, those early reports followed very much what we're used to in the U.S. First, you had your close encounters of the first kind, then you had landings, then you had humanoids. Now, the one thing that didn't happen in Latin America to a great extent were the abductions. Abduction phenomena did not have the strength that it did in the States and in
Mhm.
Britain and maybe in Australia. There were cases in Spain, some in Argentina, but not that mass awareness of them that we had in the 90s. For some
But
reason,
I do remember in Mexico, even around the time of Adamski and before, there was a chauffeur or a cab driver maybe who had that experience. I think his vehicle kind of ran out of gas,
yes,
or it was probably a beat up old wreck or something, and
Salvador
it didn't move.
Villanueva. Yep.
Yeah, and he had quite an encounter, and didn't they even bring Adamski down, and they had a big a lecture, a big event in the bullfighting ring?
That's very possible. I know that Villanueva was active for a long time. People respected him. What was very funny about his cases, as you mentioned, his car broke down in the middle of a road. He was taking two American tourists, driving them back to the border. Car breaks down. The two tourists just, disappeared. They had to walk to the nearest town and see what they did. They simply dropped out of history. But then his encounter proceeded.
They don't know what they missed.
Yeah,
They
it
don't
was-
know what they missed here.
Gentlemen, I'm
Comes
going to
out
have
for
to
the
interrupt you here because we have to go to our bottom of the hour break. So when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Scott Corrales on exploring the bizarre.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. Right now we're talking with Scott Corrales. And Scott, before I had to so rudely interrupt you to go to our bottom of the hour break, you were telling us a story about the Mexican cab driver and his experience.
That's right, Salvador Villanueva. He's among the of two main Mexican contactees of that time. But Salvador Villanueva acquired international attention because of the contactee experience. He was taken aboard the craft. He was taken on the obligatory tour of the solar system that aliens used to give you back then. But then, as I said, I thank Tim for remembering, Villanueva. I believe that he disappeared mysteriously, that two stateside researchers had gone to see him, and he had developed some kind of medical complication that he had said was a result of his involvement with the kind Space Brothers, and he sort of drops out from UFO history, at least from contactee history.
Hmm.
But I'm not sure if I may be mistaking him for someone else. But one of the U.S. researchers, I think, was called Al Nye. That name seems to stick for some reason.
Hmm.
A very creepy end to his contactee saga.
That's one of the things that I enjoy about your blog, Scott, is that you bring out a lot of stories from, especially Central and South America that we really would not hear anything about, up here in the States, and some, like you said, some really creepy stories too. That it seems to be that there's a lot more of those kind of stories down south.
I'm afraid so. In fact, I think there was a magazine out in California that told me, do not submit any more articles. We're not interested in the creepy stuff. But that was then. This is now.
Oh my gosh! Oh, okay. Well, why do you? Why do you think that is? What's the difference? You were talking earlier about how the whole abduction scenario never really took off in Central and South America, or at least if it did, it didn't get the publicity that it got up around here. So why would there be such a difference in locations and these, just sometimes really bizarre or oftentimes just abundant UFO reports?
Well, if you think about it, go back to, let's say, the 60s, when people would say, look at how the aliens, quote unquote, that manifest themselves in South America are so different from what we see in Europe, where they had, the friendly blondes in platinum spacesuits. Here we were getting, I guess the Adamski type, but in Latin America they were getting those bellicose dwarves that would try to drag you into saucers. They would get screaming three-eyed giants in Brazil. Very, very lurid, very visceral entities, manifestations, shall we say, is what they were actually getting out there. And it seemed that there was something. The spirit of the land seemed to evoke these different types of beings. That's what comes to mind. Now, when it comes to the abductee situation, there may have been, and in fact there were a couple of prominent ones, but maybe the religious implications, are we dealing with demons, made people seek religious advice rather than run to the neighborhood ufologist for, how can you put me in touch with Bud Hopkins so I can get a regression? Mm-hmm. That did not happen at all. Some local ufologists were practiced in hypnosis. They did do regressions. Some of them made it to the magazines. Perhaps the most important one was as far back as 1975, a woman who was visited by a daytime encounter, humanoid in her backyard, but it all had to be recovered by a psychologist using hypnosis. That was probably the best documented abduction of the 70s in the Spanish-speaking sphere, shall we say. Mm-hmm. And that was in Puerto Rico. In Spain, they had their own. They had the Próspera Muñoz case, where a woman in the 80s or 90s was remembering having been abducted in the 40s, in the late 1940s. But somehow she had conflated everything to say that the creatures that had visited her were gypsies, were evil gypsies who had come by and, had their way with her or what have you. So there's a lot of... They said there were ways of covering up the experience, usually with either political manifestations or religious manifestations. And by political, I'm trying to say even as far in the 90s when the Chupacabras was being seen in Central America, You had people in Costa Rica saying, no, 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 there's no chupacabras. This is just a manifestation of people's discomfort with capitalism. We should all be Marxists. And that we wouldn't see these things. And of course, in Puerto Rico, it played differently. You had biologists and scientists at the University of Puerto Rico saying, no, no, this has to do with the political status of the island. If we were either a republic or a state, we wouldn't be seeing these things. So it's schizophrenia. It's schizophrenia due to the political status. In Mexico, they said the only chupacabras is President Salinas, who's made off with $500 billion from the country. He's the chupacabras, not some creature. So there were different ways of seeing the situation aside from what was actually going on. And what was actually being reported, let's say, whether it was in magazines, on television, seemed to be brushed aside by officialdom into something, well, let's say, I'm not going to say respectable, but palatable. Yeah, say it has to do with your monetary crisis, with social uncertainty, political uncertainty. And then we can just say it was a psychosocial phenomenon, which would have pleased the European psychosocialists no end back in the 70s.
Well, now, speaking of the Chupacabra, our new book, Alien Bloodlust, has a huge section of your contributions and your research about Chupacabra. What got you involved in that to begin with?
Well, I'll tell you, I had always been interested in the Mothman, as everyone is, and in Bigfoot, and certainly their manifestations south of their border. And to suddenly start seeing that a similar creature, a winged weirdo, was now appearing in Puerto Rico was impossible to resist, especially as, it's been overlooked that the Chupacabras had a precedent. It manifested first as a very strange winged ape-like entity. And before that, the Mocha vampire, 20 years earlier, no one had ever seen until there was a sketch that appeared in a local magazine showing a similar ape-like creature. But no one ever got to see it, unlike the Chupacabras, which had several, let's say, incarnations before it achieved its final form of, the gray-headed, ape-body, winged, spined creature that captured imaginations worldwide. However, that was not the creature that was seen in Mexico. It was not the creature seen in Chile. It was not what was seen in Brazil. So you have this protean entity that seemed to be all things to all people, but have the same effect, drawing blood from animals ranging from chickens to large livestock through this one proboscis or tube that could draw blood and always leave some kind of residue behind. And that residue was actually collected and analyzed, but the results of usually with these things were inconclusive.
Yeah, it's too bad that those residues couldn't be analyzed today. With the progress that we've made in DNA research, if somebody actually took that seriously, we could probably learn a lot.
Yeah, I think now we have these advanced techniques like what CRISPR, I think it's called. That's just a new thing. It would be completely different. But I remember talking about, let's say, 1995. It seemed that some of the animals that had survived, or just their carcasses, showed the exsanguination, complete loss of blood, but then some kind of goo, chupacabras residue, that was theorized it was being injected into the animal's carcass to liquefy the interior. And then the entity would be able to draw everything out. Remember, some of those early reports said that the carcass was completely liquefied. The organs had been liquefied.
Mm-hmm. Like a spider. That's the way a spider does
very
it,
much so. Yeah. So what were we dealing with? I mean, now you go back into that old theory of aliens as insects, which I think some of the very early ufologists were saying, in order to withstand the strange maneuvers that we see UFOs being able to do, their occupants would have to be insects. Now, how they reached that conclusion, I'll leave to a biologist, but that was what was being said.
Mhm.
And yeah,
Well, Gerald Hurd, I think one of the first UFO books, that was his a theory that he put forward. Back
it would make
1950, maybe,
sense.
I think. Yeah.
It would make sense
1950.
because it was an early theory. It was an early theory, and I think it was also when people started looking into ancient aliens.
Mhm.
They looked at that one statue of the god in Tiahuanaco in Bolivia, and they said, okay, this is some kind of insect god. Maybe, yes, there was some kind of worship of insects, which other cultures have worshipped birds, and mammals, but this culture was perhaps they were venerating these forms in insect form, something to that effect. So that was going on. That was going on.
Yes.
But to go back to the chupacabras, the manifestations that we had, let's say, in 1995 in Puerto Rico, completely different by the year 2000 in Chile, where they were seeing large winged creatures, very simian creatures, attacking people on buses. Uh, Truckers were having encounters as they made their deliveries. And yet, that entire Chilean phase of the Chupacabras phenomenon has gone unnoticed, despite the fact that a Chilean senator said, I don't care what's killing these animals, we have to investigate it because the livestock farmers have to receive some kind of compensation for their losses. And that's where people started taking it seriously in that country, and then it percolated into Argentina.
Well, now
But
you in this book that we just published, the Alien Bloodlust, you have probably well over 100 large-sized pages devoted to the Chupacabra diaries. Now, did you actually go out and talk to some of the witnesses yourself?
yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Yeah.
We went to Puerto Rico in, I believe it was December of 1995, with, let's say, several months of information behind us. Through the intercession of a local ufologist, we managed to meet people. These are religious people who had had an encounter on their property, and the first man to ever, to our knowledge, to actually fight back at the chupacabras and hit it with his machete. Now, this is interesting because no one had ever gone on the offensive, so to speak. But he said when his machete contacted the creature, he said, Eso sonó como un tambor. That thing sounded like a drum, suggesting that it was either hollow, mechanical, to a way that he was very, very distressed. And our interview was cut short by members of his family who were religious and began singing religious songs. So like, let's chase this devil away. Yeah. So we took our cue.
Were you the devil? Were you the devil? They were
We
trying
were
to
the
chase
devil.
away.
Yeah, we were the agents of the devil. Yeah, talking about this stuff. So we were chased away gently by religious songs.
Uh-huh.
Now, the next person was actually, I forget the family's name, but their dog, a lovable pooch, had its close encounters with the chupacabras, had held it at bay, and the woman came out to see the entity, confronted it, and said, "You're the ugliest thing I've ever seen." To which the chupacabra sort of lifted its puny arm and wing and covered its face in shame.
Now, I feel sorry. Sorry for him.
It was amazing. And then it just flew away. It fluttered away after having hidden behind a washing machine, which we saw.
Yeah.
I mean, we went there. And
that's proof. That's proof.
All I can tell you is that the people were not interested in becoming famous. They just said, okay, now we have told you everything we know. Yeah. Now you tell us what it was we saw.
Well, tell us what it was they saw. What did they see?
Well, I tell them, look, what you have seen is something that's being reported widely in the press and perhaps is connected with the sightings of strange creatures that come in perhaps from other dimensions, we don't know, in the United States and other countries. And that's when I started telling them about Mothman, about other entities that had been reported, similar, the winged weirdos that were even prevalent in Ohio. In Ohio, after the age of Mothman that were being seen. And that seemed to mollify them. They were comforted to a certain extent to be able to hear that they weren't crazy. This had not been visited upon them. That this is something that was actually happening to other people, and it certainly was.
Well, now, why don't we have a chupacabra?
You know, a lot of people went to Puerto Rico during those crazy days, those crazy 10 to 12 months, with the intention of capturing one. The mayor of the town of Canóvanas even commissioned a cage. He had a cage, he had bait, he had 200 people doing, forays at night to try to catch chupacabras, and it never took the bait. So it wasn't for lack of trying. Night watchmen happened to see processions, let's say 1, 2, 3 creatures of the similar description, going into the property of certain corporations at night. And yet they didn't have the, I'm going to say, resolve, to, with their nightsticks to say stop or do something to detain them.
Yeah.
So there were opportunities, but either they were missed or not taken. In Mexico, as far as I know, no effort was ever made. They were too busy with their political situation, saying that any discussion of chupacabras was distracting from the political problem and that it was just a smokescreen being put up, yet those cases were happening. Now, what I liked about the Mexico situation was that now you saw scientists discreetly writing me letters, saying, we believe that this is actually a vampire bat called the Vampirus spectri that had been brought into Mexico by, then again, a devil-worshipping cult called the Golden Lucifer, I believe. And now you start getting into the black magic that is all over Mexico, and which in recent years, the local politicians' involvement in black magic became known. It became a matter of public record, I should say. So was that chupacabra seen in Mexico that actually attacked a woman named Teodora Ayala in 1997? Was that one of these enormous vampire bats? I mean, the question remains unanswered.
Yeah, that doesn't seem very likely, right? Okay, so the chupacabra you would describe them differently in different countries or different areas. They all didn't look the same, right?
They did not look the same, but the modus operandi seemed to be the same, attacking animals, drawing blood through a single puncture mark. Completely different from the cattle mutilations that Argentina has been suffering since 2002, which are traditional cattle mutes like we used to have in Nebraska and Kansas.
Yeah, there were some reports that just came to my attention from last week, actually. I think 7 herd of cattle. What was it, cattle? Yeah, were killed or mutilated or whatever happens to them.
That's been going on. If you go to the Inexplicata blog, you'll see all the cases that we've had. In fact, we stopped doing mutilations because usually we get reported by people who say, "Oh, this is ugly. We don't want to see, damaged animals. Don't do that." And so we try to sometimes just translate, present the information, and put a link to the photographs to avoid trouble.
Yeah,
but I think that there was a gentleman down there a couple of years ago when they had another major outbreak. He was looking into one head of cattle that had actually survived being mutilated, and apparently, whatever force is involved in these attacks kept coming back for the same animal, but it wouldn't die. So they named, and Linda, if you're on the air, I hope you're not offended. They named it Linda after Linda Moulton Howe. So I have to ask. I have to ask the gentleman what has become of Linda the heifer to see. What did they keep tracking? Did this creature or force keep attacking this animal, and it showed some kind of resistance to it, some kind of immunity. It's a fascinating situation, and it does not involve the chupacabras, but just traditional mutilations going back to the summer of 2002. Fascinating.
Of course, now my favorite bloodletting case is the island of Corrales.
Corrales,
Yeah. Back in 77 and
77.
78, where I guess over 400 people were attacked by, an object that they described as being a horizontal refrigerator. I mean, that's
Correct.
a peculiar type of UFO. It looked like a railroad car. I mean, the photographs that I've seen of it, I guess that would be the way that I would describe it. But these people were struck by a horizontal beam of light that came out of the craft. And now this beam of light would penetrate their homes. It would go through walls and windows and roofs. And there were markings on some of the witnesses, I guess there were over 400 individuals, and they had markings on their body. Apparently, out of this beam of light that shot out at them came some sort of device which would actually adhere to their skin and draw the blood. So now they weren't entirely drained of blood, but it was enough to cause them to feel very fatigued over an extended period of time. And they shot at the objects, and they beat the pots and pans and screamed at it and everything else they could think of. And still the objects came on a regular basis. And even if they would try to hide the objects, Chupa Chupa.
The Chupa, that's right.
Yeah, Chupa would.
Tim,
would
I'm gonna
come
have
in.
to.
Yes.
I'm gonna have to interrupt you here because we only have about 2 minutes left before we have to go to our break. So I think we need to have.
I'm gonna send that Chupa after you.
Yeah, well, we're gonna have to have Scott tell our audience where they can find out more about him online and anything that he's doing in the near future.
Certainly. Please stop by www.inexplicata.blogspot.com. And but we try to update the blog regularly, and not working on anything right now other than translating and keeping tabs on South America.
Well, it's the greatest. It's the greatest blog going, or certainly one of the best. And you've got some sensationalistic reports there. Never mind trips to the moon and Mars and Venus. You've got some really incredible things in there. How many issues have you put out? I mean, I guess issues we would call it.
Oh my gosh, it's hard to tell. We've been at it since 2005. I maybe 2,000 articles, maybe.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, that's a heck of a lot of material. Maybe someday we ought to roll it together and put it out in a book.
That would be most welcome.
Fascinating. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it, man. Give it to me next week.
It's a plan.
All right, guys. I need to interrupt you here because we have to go to our top of the hour break. So we've been talking with Scott Corrales, who's featured predominantly in our new book, Alien Bloodlust, now available on Amazon.
It's his book. It's got his name on it. It's Scott Corrales, right. Alien Bloodlust. Yeah, that's right.
All right, and we'll be right back after this break with more Exploring the Bizarre.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, here we are back at the second hour of Exploring the Bizarre. And Tim, that was a great segment with Scott Corrales. I wish we could get him on more often because he just always has so many fascinating things to talk about. But we'll leave this the first segment behind us and start the second one because we're now have Dr. Bruce Cornet on the line. And Bruce, great to have you back. Yeah, great to have you back with us again. It's been a while.
Yes, it has, and I'm glad to be back. I've enjoyed being on your show before, and hopefully I can provide some interesting information a lot has been happening in the last couple of years.
Well, I know that this is not the primary subject of tonight's show and our discussion with you, but I know that Tim Beckley has been chomping on the bit to find out more information about this. But recently, I guess they came out with a new documentary. What was it? What was it? Is it the hunt for the Skinwalker Ranch or something along those lines? Mm-hmm. And I guess that. You kind of had a little roundabout involvement in the whole Skinwalker Ranch.
Right. I was hired by NIDS back in early 2004, and I was rubbing shoulders with all of the people that had gone out into the field to that ranch and investigated it. So I got a lot of information that they presented and told me, shared with me at the time. But I've learned more since I've been working at NIDS from various other people. George Knopp, for example, has presented a number of good talks on the Skinwalker Ranch and the phenomenon. But perhaps the most incredible encounters I've ever heard were by Ryan Skinner and his friend, another Ryan, who actually encountered the Skinwalker out there in that area. And it was capable of morphing and changing into a humanoid form. And when they first found it, or first encountered it, it was somebody was driving along a dirt road and saw this, what appeared to be an Indian sitting on the side of the road, and stopped to see if he was okay. And he offered him a ride, and he got into the back seat, and he said he couldn't, he had a hood over his head, and he couldn't see his face, but his eyes glowed red, as I recall. And he got a little bit concerned at that particular point. And he drove him for a distance, and then was told to stop, and the Skinwalker just disappeared. And in another case, the two Ryans were on the cliff overseeing the ranch, and they actually had the wolf that was depicted there approach them. So they saw it firsthand, and it morphed into what appeared to be a rabbit, and then disappeared. So they had quite a story. They told us on Midnight in the Desert about a month ago, and I'd listened to that show, and I was just blown away by what the phenomena was, because I'd only gotten bits and pieces of information from people like Dr. Colm Kelleher at NIDS and Eric Davis, who told me some of the things that had happened.
Did you ever make it out to the ranch?
No, I was actually told that they were closing that operation down. I did get to see videos that they were recording and continue to record. And so I sat at a monitor and watched for hours to see if I could see anything in the videos. And I saw a strange animal at one point, but that was the extent of it. And but I never got to go out to the actual ranch, no.
So what was going on there? I mean, a portal to another dimension, a time slip, or what do you make of it?
Well, whatever the phenomenon is, it reads people's minds. It knows what is happening with the people that are around and can mimic certain things. I mean, I'm now telling a story that Ryan told on that radio show about how they went out into the night. They were scared driving on Indian reservation. They didn't know if the local police would stop them and pick them up, and question them for being there without permission. And as they were driving along, they saw the blue and red flashing lights that normally would be on the top of a police car off in the distance. So they stopped, and where I think they were at a campsite or a place where they were planning on camping, and the lights just kept on blinking off in the distance. And they were wondering, what in the world? Why aren't they coming over and encountering the Ryans? And they decided to go out to investigate. And then the lights started coming towards them. And before they got to them, the lights just disappeared, and there wasn't anything. So the fear that they had of seeing a police car seems to have been manifested by that phenomenon, which I find to be fascinating. And there's a lot of new interest being taken seriously about the paranormal phenomenon, the interdimensional phenomenon. And I've seen images of entities coming through portals in near Wanacue, New Jersey, that were taken by Brian Williams, known as Sargell 18, and Tommy Sinisi. I was there in the field with them and saw them doing all of this work there, and the results they were getting on with their cameras. And it was quite amazing that they had actually identified a portal where entities from another dimension would be coming into our world, and they could photograph them with a flash at night.
Now, let's go back a little, Bruce. What is your background? You do have academic and scientific credentials?
Oh yeah, quite a few. 13 years of college, 3 degrees, bachelor's, master's in botany, and PhD in geology and botany, and from Penn State University. Mm-hmm. And I started out in the oil industry, and some very unusual things began happening to me in 1980, 1981. Up until that time, if you put it into a time frame, I graduated from Penn State in 1977, went to work in Houston, and by 1980, 81, I was on my own, forming my own oil company, and we were going to be drilling in Virginia, and ended up at the well site being abducted right in front of my entire drill crew. And,
no way.
Yes, and there's a whole website on that, and that was at that time I didn't know anything about UFOs. I thought I had never seen any, and I was my company, Gemini Oil, was a partnership with Cornell Oil out of Dallas, and we were drilling a couple deep wells in the Richmond Basin outside of Richmond, Virginia. And I came to work one day, and there was this. The crew was all excited because they have 8-hour towers, they call them, or shifts, 3 8-hour shifts. And the night shift had reported to the morning shift that a UFO had come and hovered over the forest cut field next to the well site, and they all had stopped and watched it. And I said, well, boy, maybe it might come back again tonight. So I put in my normal 12 hours, and I was getting really tired, and I told my mudlogging crew that I'm going into the back of the mudlogging trailer to take a nap, and if the UFO comes back, please come and get me. And they said, oh, sure, we'll come and get you. I went to sleep, and I was rudely awakened by these 3 beings that were floating over me, and one took a rod and touched it to my head, and I felt this energy go through me, and they levitated me and passed me through the wall of the trailer. And that freaked me out, and I don't remember anything after that. I had to go through regressive hypnosis to recover the actual abduction. But after I was brought back hypothermic, which means the inside of that craft was like inside of a walk-in refrigerator, and my joints ached and different parts of my body ached. And I stumbled out of the bunk, and went into the front of the trailer, and nobody was there. Now, this is a 24/7 drilling operation. So I went to the door of the trailer, and I looked out to see what was going on, and nobody was at the drilling rig. The drilling pipe was just turning very slowly, and so they weren't drilling. I said, "What the heck?" And where is everybody? And I looked around the corner of the trailer, and here everybody, all the drill crew and the mudlogging crew, was standing together, looking up into the sky. And here was this UFO. And this moment I saw it, it was all lit up with multicolored lights. It just took off. And then the drill crew started coming back to their stations, and the mudlogging crew came back. And I said, "Well, what were you doing out there?" He says, "We're watching the UFO." And I said, "Well, why didn't you come and get me?" And they said, "We did, but you weren't there." And so I took Rick by the hand, and I led him back to the bunk where I was sleeping. I said, "Did you look in this bunk?" And he said, "Yes, but you weren't there." And so I was totally confused. I was in a lot of pain. And so I just went back to my motel and went to sleep, not knowing what the heck had happened. The next day, they told me about what they had seen, how a beam of light came down from the craft. They saw these small beings floating through the beam into the trailer, and they brought out a larger a person, which was me, and they saw that me being taken into the craft. But I couldn't believe it. I mean, at that particular point, I'd never had an experience like this that I remembered consciously. So I just put it out of my mind, even though I wrote the information down in my log, which I have it as evidence that this really did take place. So that was the event that started a whole series of events in my life. But it wasn't until 1992 when my family and I had moved up to Middletown, New York, from Houston, Texas, that things really got bizarre. After my wife died in 1991, I started having contact in the field around the Pine Bush area of New York. Quite a bit of contact, in fact. I've documented over an 11-year period over 140 close encounters with photographs and videos, and many of them with multiple witnesses watching what was going on. So,
well, now that was quite a flap when it was going on. In fact, I just attended the last summer. They have a little alien festival in Pine Bush. But back in its day, there were a lot of people that were traveling even from Manhattan here to go up there to have sightings. There were different locales where these things were being seen pretty much on a regular basis. Of course, the main participant was a young lady by the name of Ellen Crystal.
Crystal, right?
Yeah, who is now unfortunately deceased. But she went up there with her camera, and people tried to poo-poo all the events. They just said, "Oh, I don't know if they accused her of making it up, but these are conventional objects, and people are just misinterpreting them." But she did put out a book, very nicely illustrated, and we used quite a few of the photographs in a UFO Universe magazine. Is that how you first heard of the flap? Was through Ellen?
Yes. Actually, I saw the miniseries on television, Intruders, by Bud Hopkins, with a foreword, I think, by John Mack. And I wanted to get a copy of that book, so I went to the local bookstore in Middletown, New York, and the manager went to the shelf and pulled out a copy of Intruders. And he said, "Well, you might want to read this other book, which was Silent Invasion, that Ellen Crystal had written." And when I got home, I started reading it, and I say, "Wait a minute, this is about the area I'm living in. This is happening all around me in the different towns." And I was shocked. And I called some of my friends. I said, "Do you know about Ellen Crystal?" And they said, "Oh yeah, we know about her. We've met her. Does anybody have her a phone number?" And somebody said, "Well, I know somebody who does. Let me get back to you." So I got her phone number, and I called her up, and I introduced myself, and I said, "I'd like to see what's going on out there," because I was at that time a a university scientist who, in universities, we were supposed to talk about or research the UFO phenomenon. And I said that she's a musician, and that she gives a little information in her book. And my last name is Cornet, and I'm a geologist.
She lived next door to Steven Tyler from Aerosmith.
Wow!
Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
In fact, yeah, in the magazine UFO Universe, we had the two of them a photograph of the two of them sitting there chatting together.
Wow!
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, this is good information to have additional information about what was going on. But she took me out into the field, and the first night I was out there, the ships were flying around us, and that hooked me. And I couldn't stop going out into the field whenever I could after work.
Well, now, what did the ships look like?
Most of them were just lights. Because it was at night, they were all stealth black, but you could get an idea of their shape by the distribution of the lights on them. And many of them were triangles or diamond shaped, not circular craft. Although there were circular craft that were spotted over the area. The triangles were probably the most common, but the diamond-shaped ones I nicknamed the manta ray because it looks like a manta ray, but it had a long tail on it, and it could retract the tail and turn into a triangle. And I have quite a few encounters with that, both on videotape and on time exposures. And I've put much of that information on my websites. But the thing that is fascinating about this is that this was a local phenomenon. The military knew that this area, what was going on in the area, and they were investigating it constantly monitoring it. I asked, well, don't you pick anything up on radar? And they said, all of the radar information we get from that area is been classified. It's been blocked out. So nobody could access it. And I thought this was rather strange. And people had seen the military people in the area not too infrequently, and trying to monitor this area activity that was going on there. One of the things that I encountered was that the C-5s, the Stewart Air Force Base at Newburgh, is a C-5 training facility for that very large cargo air jet. And they would, you'd see them flying in the night sky quite a bit. And quite frequently, they would be circling the areas where all of this UFO activity was taking place. And so I tracked one all the way back to the Stewart Airport. And so I knew that this is what they were doing. They were monitoring what was going on. And have you heard of Vincent Police, who wrote the Pine Bush Phenomenon, the book?
No, I don't.
He reported that he and his friends were out in the field once, and they'd seen one of these craft, and within a matter of minutes, one of the C-5s was roaring over their heads and chasing it. And I thought this was rather interesting. So what is going on here? I have actual photographs of these ships diving into the ground, passing through trees, dematerializing. And there's no question that they are passing into another dimension, a parallel dimension. But who are they? And I have located the entrances to at least two of their underground bases. And Ellen Crystal put this information out there in her book. She said she's seen the ships dive into the ground and disappear. And she said,
I'm just thinking. We have a book called UFO Repeaters: The Camera Doesn't Lie, and that has a very good synopsis of her encounters in there. because
Yes.
the book that she wrote is, I guess you can still find it, but it's technically out of print. I think the publisher, I don't know whether they ever published anything else besides your book, but it did become very difficult to find after a while. I'm sure you could probably buy it, as a used book somewhere, probably grossly overpriced.
Right.
You
Well,
know,
it's still available for those who are
yeah,
interested. And there were multiple
yeah,
printings because even
yeah,
the cover picture changed. And they did
yes.
print a version in Spanish too.
Uh-huh. Now, we were talking about with Scott earlier about how some of these occupants could be insectoids. Now, I think that that's what she believes because some of these photographs, when you analyze them, it seemed that they were standing in in a open hatchway, and they seem to be giant praying mantis.
Well, some of them, that one photograph she took of the several of them standing in reflected light of high energy light around a craft, some of them look very strange. I agree. Others look more humanoid. So we really don't know who these beings are. But we do know that they have established a underground basis there. And I went out and did a 24 square mile magnetic survey between 1992 and 95. At the time, I was working for Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory in Palisades, New York, and I borrowed one of their proton magnetometers. And I would go out into the field and take readings at different stations after work and on the weekends. And it took me 3 years to accumulate 1,800 stations worth of data. And when I put the map together from that, I was absolutely blown away as to what was under the ground. There were all of these magnetic anomalies or representing.
Bruce, I need to interrupt you here, and we'll continue our conversation on exploring the bizarre in just a few minutes, so stay tuned.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Welcome back to the final segment of Exploring the Bizarre. And our guest, Dr. Bruce Cornet, was telling us before we had to go to our last break about a little ground analysis that he was doing in the Pine Bush region. So, Dr. Cornet, please continue your story.
What I discovered were these magnetic anomalies. They were what we call dipole anomalies, usually caused by a high concentration of iron ore in the ground. And these I discovered based on my geologic work were coming from ancient granitic islands that were surrounded and buried by ancient sea muds. And I discovered signals coming out of the ground over some of these magnetic anomalies or ancient islands. And it would appear that these alien probes had landed on some of the islands when we had an ocean at that location, and they remained there. And the area sank, and the islands were covered over by muds, then by younger rock, and eventually the muds were turned to rock, and then the uplift and erosion has brought some of these ancient probes very close to the surface. And I discovered one of them between Walden and Pine Bush based on the readings of my magnetometer. And I was actually recording these incredible magnetic pulses that were coming out of the ground. And many people had seen some strange things about this area. And a Jewish cemetery had been built on half of it. And so there were all of these anomalies that were associated with the underlying craft, which we did. The History Channel came and did a ground penetrating radar survey, and we imaged it, the craft. It's only 9 feet below the surface and over 25 feet in thickness. And it's an enormous triangle, 565 feet on a side. and there at each of the apices of it, there are these beams of magnetic energy that come out that are sometimes stronger than the entire Earth's magnetic field when these pulses go out into space. And there's a central beam, presumably a signal beam, coming out of the center of this triangle. And whenever the constellation Bootes is overhead, the temperatures on above ground during the summer are over this triangle tend to drop significantly, as much as 10 to 15 degrees. And during the winter, they are elevated by that much. And snow, we've actually recorded it and pictured it melting on top of this triangle. So we know it's there. We know, and people have said that they felt the ground humming at different times. And I, with a Geiger counter, have determined that it is definitely nuclear powered. So it has been there functioning for the last 400 million years. Back when some alien from an ancient civilization that may no longer exist came to Earth looking for probably rare earth elements. And their probes remained there and then became entombed in rock. And now some of them are very close to the surface. And I found evidence during my magnetic survey that there are at least 3 of them sending signals out into space.
And what frequencies are they broadcasting?
Well, the magnetic pulses are measured in gammas. Mm-hmm. The Earth's magnetic field is around 35,000 gammas. And these pulses were normally about 11,000 gammas, and sometimes went up well over 40,000 gammas. And they were narrow beams, maybe no more than 2 feet in diameter. But it's sort of it's sobering to think that I was sticking my hand in these beams when I was taking measurements of them with the magnetometer. You'd think that maybe my hand would have been fried or injured. Also, plants saw the energy coming out of ground, and they mistook it for the sun. So a lot of herbaceous plants, as they're growing very rapidly, would be growing towards these beams and bending towards the beams, and that was pretty freaky too. So there really is a craft there, and the military knows about it thanks to my putting this information on my website. And people have seen caravans come out there, and men in military outfits go into the cemetery area and dig holes and put probably sensing devices in there, and then leave. But nobody, you can't. Whatever this object is way too big for a recovery by the military. But at best, it's about the size of 2 football fields or a football stadium. And, they can't very well hide that if they dug it up. They could build a huge hangar over it. But then that's just telling everybody, look what we have,
Well, now, is it in a cave or how, where exactly you say underground, but that
it's entombed within black shale. The black shale was mud at the time that completely buried it over time, and then with more mud and rock on top of it, it was turned into solid black shale, so that the craft is encased within black shale. It'd be encased within cement, basically.
Well, there may be other craft like this in other parts of the world. In fact, we've had Ted Phillips on the show. I don't know if you know him or not. He worked with Dr. Hynek for many, many years. He's best known for his physical trace cases. And he's involved with a gentleman. They were going to explore this a cave in Tim, was it Czechoslovakia or Hungary?
Yeah, it was one of those countries. My first thought was Poland, but I think actually you're right. I think it was Hungary.
Yeah, and underground, they know there's a device of some kind, but they can't get to it. Now, Ted has the maps of where this object is located, but it would take a team of very seasoned explorers and cave spelunkers or what have you to get to it. And part of the cavern wall, I think, has covered it up. It's kind of like moved over the course of the 500,000 years or something like that. But they can still hear it. But now, Ted wanted to go there many. He's talked about going there many times over the years. But like all of us, he's getting up there in the years, and I think a little bit of bad health hasn't helped him, and so I don't know if he's ever going to turn this a project over to anybody else or not, which is a shame because it seems like it might lead to some very startling findings, Tim. I know I was very impressed by his research into this.
A question, Bruce, that occurs to me is: are these buried craft responsible for these areas becoming portal areas, or were they attracted and landed there to begin with because they were portal areas?
I don't know. I would suspect they were there for mining purposes because these granitic islands have been mined in Franklin, New Jersey, and they're just loaded with all types of rare earth elements that are very valuable. And these granites formed very early in the Earth's history when you would have very little differentiation of all of the stardust that went into making Earth. So you would have a mixture of many different kinds of elements. So that's my assumption, that they came here looking for these rare earths. And now these areas have become literally signal beacons out into space. You could call them each one being like a microwave dish sending signals that are attracting other craft to the area. As far as their portals, there is a portal just west of the downtown Pine Bush that has been documented, and all sorts of strange things, time warps, occur there. So you may be correct that there's some correlation between these areas, and yet we're finding out with more and more study that there are portals all over the place, and people just don't realize it.
Now, some seem to be more active than others.
Yes, absolutely. Like the Wanacue one that was being studied back in the late 90s. Brian Williams has put a lot of this information out on YouTube for those who are interested. They just have to Google Wanacue, New Jersey, and they'll pull up his information. And he has documented that this is not just the local Wanacue where this is happening, but it's over a large trapezoid area that goes all the way from Montauk on Long Island, across Wanacue to southern Pennsylvania, and then west to Pine Bush. So we have a lot of stuff going on there that people just don't realize is happening.
I can't remember who pointed this out one time, but it was suggested that as the Earth rotates around the sun, as the sun rotates around the galaxy, and as the galaxy goes about its business, that we're constantly entering new energized areas in space, and that could explain why there are certain portal areas that will be active for a while, and then they'll just kind of fade away, and new ones will pop up. They're being energized by these different regions in space, and it makes me wonder, also if this may be why. And as you and Tim Beckley well know, back in the 50s and early 60s, you had kind of almost a different groups of aliens seen running around, or ultra terrestrials, whatever you want to call them, than we have now. It seems like that a new door, or doors open and close, new ones appear, and different groups seem to infiltrate onto the planet.
Also, I think that there are a lot more groups here than there were in the past, and that they have divided the area up into territories. The reason I say that is that I've encountered at least 4 different types of ETs, and they each are found only in a certain area. The ones down in Virginia are different from the ones in Connecticut, that are different from the ones in New York, for example. So this may go along with what you're saying, that there are different portals associated with different areas, or they could just simply have decided to, carve out the Earth into different operational regions.
Well, what about the woman that you met in Amsterdam in 1963? I mean, that's a pretty fascinating story.
Yeah, and this was with my French class. After graduation from high school, we went over to France, spent most of the summer in the city of Cannes on the Riviera, which was extraordinary for a 17-year-old. To go on see all of the coastal areas along the Mediterranean. And on the way back home, we stopped in Paris, and then we stopped at Amsterdam. And at Amsterdam, we stayed in the American Hotel just down the street from the house where Anna Frank had lived, of that story during World War II. And a group of us guys decided that we were going to meet in the lobby in the morning and decide which tourist attractions we would go see. So we went down there and met in the lobby. And as I was standing there, I noticed this woman standing off to the side. And when I made eye contact with her, she came over and she introduced herself. She says, "Hi, I'm Maya. What are you doing?" And I said, "We're planning on going out to the different tourist attractions in the city." And she said, I would like to be your guide. If you would be willing, I will show you the city." And I said, "Wow, she's a lot more attractive than these guys are." So I took her up on that offer, and for 3 days we would meet at the front of the lobby, and we would go to different tourist attractions. And she was asking me all sorts of questions. We talked about many different subjects. We even talked about space travel. And on the 3rd day, she wanted to introduce me to her friend, Lyra. So we went back to the zoo, and I met Lyra, and then we went about our way. And part of the plans for the French class group was to go to this winery. So Maya came with me, and we went out there. And I asked her if I could get a picture of her, and she said no. She didn't want a picture of her being taken. But when we were at that winery, I had my picture taken, and she was in the background. And so I have a picture of her. And this just was filed away in my memory. No big deal. At the last day, when I took her back to her room, I asked if we could communicate and write to each other. And she said, "No, that will not be possible." I said, "Why?" And she says, "I don't live here." And she knew Amsterdam so well that I was rather surprised. I thought she lived there, and she only had her friend Lyra with her. And so I said, "Where do you live?" She says, "In the mountains." And I said, "What mountains?" She says, "The Andes Mountains." And I said, "Wow." She lives in South America, and she's all the way over here, and that puzzled me. It wasn't until I read Dr. Carla Turner's book, Masquerade of Angels, which is about the Ted Rice story, who a year before I met Maya and Lyra, he met them at the Sun Valley ski resort in Idaho during the summer. He had a summer job there. He was in high school as well. And he met Maya, and they would go on walks, and they would talk, and then occasionally Lyra would show up. And this, he tried to get to find out more information about her, who she was, and the only thing she would say is that I live in the mountains. Well, what mountains? The Andes Mountains. And that's the most that she would ever talk about where she came from. But on the last day, something very different happened, and Ted was regressed hypnotically to find out what happened on that last day. And Maya and Lyra came and picked him up, and they walked out into the mountains and climbed up into a box canyon in a mountain, and there was an alien craft, and they boarded the craft, and they took him to their underground cave in the Andes Mountains. Now, what is important about this story is that they showed him not only where they lived underground, but they also showed him how they grew human clones. And they said that when one of our bodies wears out, we switch our consciousness to a new clone. And so the implication is that Maya and Lyra are clones. And they said, well, he didn't believe it at first. He says, well, let's lie down on this table next to this other clone, and we'll transfer your consciousness into it, and we'll prove to you that this works. And they did. And he was freaked out when he woke up or became conscious again. He was in a woman's body. And he asked them, well, please put me back in my original body, which they did. And then they took him back to the ski resort. And that's what they recovered from the hypnotic regression. So they apparently have found a way to have eternal life here on Earth by growing clones of themselves and just switching vessels whenever one wears out.
So why do you think that they communicated with you?
One of the things that they also found out, or Ted, from interviewing Ted, is that Maya showed Ted a photo album, and it had pictures of all the people that she had interviewed. And that was one of the things that she was doing. One of her jobs or assignments was to interview different people that they had chosen for various reasons to follow and throughout their life. And even though I, in 1992, saw what I consciously saw my first UFOs, I did not realize until that time, until my memory started coming back, that I am an abductee from childhood. So I have, all through my childhood, had these encounters, and that my mind was memory of them has been blocked until that time.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we are going to have to leave it at that because we are almost at the end of the program, and I want to give you a chance to let our listeners know where they can find you online and any upcoming projects that you're working on.
Okay. They can contact me at cornetbruce@yahoo.com, and also they can go to my website, which is at the Monmouth Internet location, and it's
well, we've got links to your websites on our homepage.
Userpages.monmouth.com and tilde Bruce Cornet or B Cornet, and they can get to my different web pages through that link.
And you have some YouTube videos up too, right?
Yes, I do. You just do a search of Google for Bruce Cornet on YouTube.
Very, very interesting videos. And again, we should remind people, if they want a pretty lengthy synopsis of the Pine Bush sightings, they can obtain our book, UFO Repeaters, The Camera Does Not Lie. And earlier tonight, we talked about alien bloodlust. And Tim, we've got a very big special going on at conspiracyjournal.com with 3 of the books at a very special price. That's totally insane. It's like we've resurrected Crazy Eddie.
Yeah, that's right. We got 3 special books for you of only $49.95 right here at Crazy Tim's.
There you go. And again, what a wonderful show this was. I think we learned a lot, and also too the vibes were just right with our 2 guests this evening, and that's why we host Exploring the Bizarre. And I think, I don't know how many episodes, Peter would know how many episodes we have, but anyway, I want to thank everybody, Tina, the producer, and Peter, Bernard, and Helen, and Carol, of course, and everybody who makes this show possible, especially our wonderful guests.
And thank you for having me.
You betcha.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.